And this is Wisdom Teachings. Are there multiple references to reptilian humanoid beings similar to the Draco we've talked so much about on this network in the Hindu scriptures? This is an area that has been notably absent from alien astronaut theorists' works up until now. In this episode, I intend to show you compelling proof that reptilian humanoids were widely known to exist in the time that the Mahabharata and other ancient texts were written. Let's get started. The Hindu scriptures describe a world that is entirely different than the one that we now know. And that, to me, is one of the most enigmatic aspects of this mystery. What was going on during the time that these books were written? What era of history was this? And were there open interactions between different types of extraterrestrial beings that were considered commonplace? A lot of times for me, reading the Vedas is sort of like reading someone else's mail. You don't understand the context of the conversation. There's a lot of things missing. There's a lot of strange vocabulary terms that require an advanced knowledge of Hinduism to truly understand. There are events referred to that you never really get the context about what exactly happened. There are whole groups of people, races of beings, that are described as if everybody knows who they are, and this is just commonplace. So what's happening with the Hindu scriptures for me is a fundamental, different world in every sense of the term, something that we really don't understand. And so we're reading a document that might as well be from another planet, because Earth, during that time, was a completely different place than what Earth is like today. And there are compelling clues that support that conclusion. As an example, when we look at the descriptions of Vimanas in the Hindu scriptures, there is no question that we are dealing with a phenomenon that would be described now as an unidentified flying object. We're dealing with craft that have anti-gravity, that make a humming noise as they travel. They have particle beam weaponry. They're able to fly from one side of a mountain to the other through the mountain without any trouble whatsoever. And there are wars taking place with these craft, which at various times are called things like chariots. I've seen various parts of the Vedas where they're called cars. Essentially what they're doing is using words that make sense in our modern lexicon to describe these Vimanas. There's been a lot of really great scholarship done on the subject of ancient aircraft in the Hindu scripture. That's not really what I want to go into. I want to focus in this episode on trying to get deeper into what this culture actually understood. What was just the common everyday life that they had? Because it is a life that seems to be so different that to the modern eye, it's all mythology. But now, with what we are coming out with on Cosmic Disclosure, with various insiders bringing us knowledge of the number and degree of extraterrestrial civilizations that are now interacting with the Earth, it starts to look different. It starts to look like our current level of insider knowledge is finally catching up with the Hindu scriptures enough that we can actually make an intelligent discernment about what we are reading and conclude that those same extraterrestrials have not really... We are only hearing about them from these space program people. One of the extraterrestrials that you've probably heard about before, but maybe you haven't thought about too much, is Ganesh. And you've probably seen many illustrations of Ganesh, whether you're at an Indian restaurant or whether you've seen them in videos on the internet or in television programs. You're looking at a being that, at least the head, appears predominantly like an elephant. But notice that an elephant head is not really the same as how Ganesh is illustrated. An elephant's head is very large and boxy, and the eyes are kind of on the side of the face. The ears are very large and they droop down quite a bit, and the trunk is exceedingly large. Yet what we see with Ganesh is a being where the eyes are centered on the front of the face, more like a typical human being would be. The ears are significantly smaller, and the trunk only goes down a little bit below the chin, maybe in certain illustrations a little bit farther, but certainly not much more than the top of the sternum. So this is clearly not an elephant. It is a being that is analogized as somehow being akin to an elephant, but it's not. There are varying ideas and scholarship about what this could be. One of the things that Corey Goode brought to our attention is that there is a civilization inside the earth. Some now call them the Draco, and they were described in the Amazing Stories comics of the late 1940s. This whole idea of beings called the Shaver Mysteries, that's where this came from Richard Shaver, where he apparently went down there and met a race of beings inside the earth today that actually have an elongated proboscis type of nose similar to an elephant trunk and exaggerated large ears. So it's entirely possible that this being, Ganesh, is meant to illustrate one of these Draco. And Corey Goode has said on Cosmic Disclosure that these beings are still around. He's personally seen them, he's personally interacted with them, and there have been other witnesses who have since come forward and reported being abducted by these same type of beings and escaping. So Ganesh could be that. Another very plausible hypothesis is that Ganesh is a human like us that for whatever reason didn't have the ability to breathe our atmosphere. It might have been toxic to them. And so this being would need to have some kind of helmet on. Perhaps the helmet is predominantly see-through glass, but there may have been something akin to a World War I type of gas mask hose coming down off of that face. In which case, we're looking at a stylized description. Remember the telephone game. Remember how easy it is for people to tell a story, and in the story they make a little bit of an embellishment. They think they knew what they were talking about. It gets embellished, embellished, embellished. So we don't really know what these beings looked like exactly. And when we get into the subject of Draco reptilians, which we're going to cover in detail in this episode, I believe it's the same basic idea, because as you're going to see, there are depictions of these beings that are still on temple walls in India today, undeniably reptilian in nature with humanoid characteristics. So the Vedas are coming from a time in history that is conventionally believed to be not that long ago. Even typical hardcore Indian scholars don't date it as far back as anything more than 3100 BC. That's still very, very archaic. That's something that goes back a lot farther than anything should have gone. But now, with the research that has come, carvings of animals and carvings of people and carvings of events on them, and they are undeniably carbon dated to 13,000 years ago. We don't really know who built Göbekli Tepe. We don't know where it came from. We see areas like Cappadocia in Turkey nearby where there are vast underground cavern systems that are carved in layers that go down multiple floors, but yet they're organized from one layer to the next as if someone at least had some kind of GPS and could accurately carve this in a way that would require some type of surveying equipment that looks through the ground. So once we put Göbekli Tepe back into the equation, we have to fundamentally reassess other texts. And the Vedas are a very unique example of this. In addition to Ganesh, who has the elephant type of trunk, we have Hanuman, who appears to be the monkey-headed god, where his nose and mouth area is protruding similar to the look of a monkey. And of course, we also have Krishna, who is always being described as a being who looks basically like us, but has extremely, what we would consider godlike capabilities, and his skin is blue. And in all of these Vedic depictions that have survived to the modern times, we see Krishna cavorting with Radhe, his consort, if you will, his female companion, and she has ordinary skin like someone from here. And we clearly see depictions of the two of them together where he's blue-skinned and she's got regular, conventional-looking skin. Other images of Krishna, I actually got this in a dream the other night. Other images of Krishna show him with poisonous cobras draped around his neck. And these cobras do not bite him. They do not pose any danger. Krishna, I actually got this in a dream the other night. Other images of Krishna show him with poisonous cobras draped around his neck. And these cobras do not bite him. They do not pose any danger to him. And this would be, in my dream, what I was told was that he had the ability to hypnotize those snakes so that they posed no threat to him whatsoever. And this was another demonstration of the awesome powers that he had. Because when you get into the Vedas and you read what these beings could do, they do appear to be ascended beings, or what we now would call fourth density. They can move objects with their minds, they can communicate telepathically, they can levitate, they can do really amazing stuff. And this was considered commonplace. It's like we're reading other people's mail. We're looking in on something that we totally don't understand. There's all these strange terms. There's events referred to that we don't know what they are. And everybody talks about it as if it's all just something you take for granted. So all of the data lines up that this is in fact before the Great Atlantean Flood, and that this civilization we're looking at was warring with the pre-Adamite civilization. There were multiple ET groups fighting it out on Earth, trying to determine who gets to win. And the one that we're going to focus on the most in this episode is called the Rakshasas. Now, my conclusion, and I'm going to prove this to you, is that the Rakshasas are the Draco. And there's also a group called Asuras, and Rakshasas appear to be one of those groups. But once we dig into this, it's going to be very clear. So let's take a look now. So the first thing I'm going to direct you to is this entry from Wisdom Library, in which we have an actual description of Rakshasas, which says that it means something in Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, and Jainism. So remember now, the Ranga Puja, according to the Nyaya Sastra, accordingly, the master of the dramatic art who has been initiated for the purpose shall consecrate the playhouse after he has made obeisance, e.g. to Rakshasas. I want to focus in on this because this is really the key. Look at this. A class of Asuras or ungodly people, the Rakshasas are always opposed to the Creator's will. Generally, they eat human beings and they have grotesque forms. So check this out now, because I'm going to list off some of the things of this description. It'll make a lot more sense now. So here's the word in English and Sanskrit. As we just said, a class of Asura or ungodly people. The Rakshasa are always opposed to God's will, and they have these grotesque forms. Now that suggests that the grotesque form is in fact some type of reptilian body, but we're going to get a lot more clear on this. So I just want you to remember, they're evil, they're grotesque, and they eat human beings. This is very consistent with the modern reports we've had from Corey Good, William Tompkins, and now Pete Peterson as well, about Draco reptilians, as well as several other insiders I know who are not willing to come forward yet. So now I'm going to read off of this description that you're looking at. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, I'm just going to read a part, and I broke it out for the slide so we don't have to read it like this. Here we go. Rakshasa, the Sanskrit male Rakshasa or female Rakshasi, in Hindu mythology is a type of demon or goblin. Rakshasas, this is very important, have the power to change their shape at will and appear as animals, as monsters, or in the case of female demons, as beautiful women. So the shape-shifting is important because modern reports of Draco from some of the insiders I've spoken to show that they do have the ability to make themselves look like whatever they want. This is how people get screen memories. This is modern reports of Draco from some of the insiders I've spoken to show that they do have the ability to make themselves look like whatever they want. This is how people get screen memories. This is where probably the legend of dragons comes from, that they would project themselves sort of as they look, but maybe with more of a serpent-like body, an elongated tail, no legs. And so it does appear that these beings have extraordinary telekinetic ability and telepathic ability and can literally manipulate what you think. Once again, we're seeing this idea that they're grotesque, evil, etc. Now let's continue. The term Rakshasa, however, generally applies to those demons who haunt cemeteries, eat the flesh of men, and drink the milk of cows dry as if by magic. Now this is interesting because here, Linda Moulton Howe is getting paid off. We have a direct suggestion of cattle mutilations. that they're drinking cows dry. And that might be something that's been going on for a very long time, and since the cow is sacred to the Hindu people, it would have been very traumatic for them. Here's the next slide I want to show you, and we're going to read again from this where I broke it out. Rakshasas are demons who are forces of evil. They appear to be related to the Asuras, and the names might be used interchangeably. Asuras are the traditional opponents of the gods, so they're one of the categories of Asuras, which again, Asura just means evil extraterrestrial. So here's the next thing that I want to show you that I find really fascinating. There's a word Rakshasa, which now definitely appears to be Draco, and we're going to get a little more into this as we go on. And then there's also the word Takshaka, which unambiguously, absolutely means snake. Now I want you to look carefully at these two words and notice that there's only a couple of letters different between them. Of course, one starts with an R and one starts with a T, but you have Rakshasa and you have Taksha, very similar. And this, to me, in terms of etymology, suggests that it's talking about the same thing, just with a slight variation. It's got the same feel, and that is supported when we actually analyze Hindu scripture. Let's take a look. We're going to read now from Book 1 of the Mahabharata, a section called Astika Parva in the Adi Parva. That's the name of Book 1, is Adi Parva. And here's where you're going to see Takshaka show up. Takshaka comes with speed. He is my enemy. Now this is one of the good guys talking in 156 in the Mahabharata. Takshaka, anxious and afflicted, became visible in a moment in the skies. And when you see that he's referred to as a snake, this is going to make more sense because he's visible in the skies, suggesting again that he's in a flying craft. Let's go on. His terrible cries and loud roars being heard, a loud roar from some type of spacecraft. Very interesting. His body being disabled by your mantras, he is falling from heaven. So this suggests again that these ascended beings like Krishna had the ability to do prayers, and that these prayers were somehow creating weaponry, or maybe were used in conjunction with weaponry, that were actually shooting down these beings in the skies with loud roaring noises that then fall from heaven. And then we hear that these Takshasas, or snakes, get burned up. Let's read that. Even now, rolling in the skies and deprived of consciousness, i.e. his ship is in the sky, the prince of snakes cometh, breathing loudly. So deprived of consciousness, something has hit him now, and he's breathing, he's in a lot of trouble. His ship is rolling in the sky. Many thousands and tens of thousands and billions of snakes fell into the fire. So by this point in the scripture, I jumped ahead a little bit, the ship has crashed, and again, Vimanas, the ship has crashed, and again, Vimanas show up all over the place, and these people in the ship are burning up. O most excellent Brahmana, so great is the number of these snakes that I am unable to count them all. Now he's talking about Takshasas, but now he's saying snakes very clearly. But it's not snakes that are like typical snakes we think of today. It's just a slang term because they've seen snakes on earth and these beings are snake-like. So they refer to them in slang as snakes. But snakes don't have names, snakes don't have families, and snakes don't fly around in flying objects. Let's go on reading. Now here they give a whole bunch of these names of these snakes. And it says here the first names, the principal ones of Vasuki's race alone, where their colors are blue, red, and white. And again, these colors dovetail very nicely with whistleblower reports from Corey Good and others about how the Draco actually look. There is a warrior caste of Draco that are red, and the ruling class is white. The blue, maybe there might be something there. I have another insider that did report seeing blue reptilians. But let's read how they start to name off all these beings. It's very bizarre. And of course, they're described as having, as you see here in yellow, a terrible form and a huge body, much bigger than a regular snake. I'm not going to read all these names, but look at all the names. Each one of these beings obviously were known enough that their names were widely discussed, and these snakes, born of Vasuki, fell into the fire. You can see, I probably don't even want to say the names because it'll invoke them in one sense, so let's not do that, but I want you to at least read it. And, O Brahmana, numerous other snakes, well-born and of terrible form and great strength, were burnt in the blazing fire. Again, we're being given a description of people who are huge, who have names, families, they have weapons, they fly, and then they get... I shall now mention those born in the race of Takshaka, i.e. the snake. Here now their names. And then once again we get this huge list of names. And it is interesting, if you look at the bottom there, Saruman sounds a lot like Saruman, which is the villain in Lord of the Rings. And there's no doubt that J.R.R. Tolkien was aware of ancient mythology, so that may not have been an accident. It's something interesting to speculate. And there's even more of this. Let's go on and look at more. Obermanna, thus I have recited the names of the principal snakes known widely for their achievements. Regular serpents that slither around on the ground are not going to be known for their achievements, and they're not going to have names. I have not been able to name all. The number is countless. The sons of these snakes, the sons of those sons that were burnt having fallen into the fire, I am unable to mention because there's so many, as he says right here. And then we get even more description of this. Many others with huge bodies, great speed, i.e. their craft fly fast, tall as mountain summits, i.e. they're giant reptilians, capable of assuming at will any form and mastering any degree of strength. We're definitely not talking about regular snakes. With poison like a blazing fire, afflicted by the curse of a mother, meaning they have weapons that are akin to a poison, were burnt in that great sacrifice. So this is a massive war. This is describing an awesome attack against Draco reptilians, undeniably. But here is the point that I wanted to round this out with because it's so bizarre. Only recently, as Pete Peterson has finally been authorized by the United States government to open up with what he knows about the truth of the Draco, have we found out that in the past there have been diasporas of Draco, meaning certain Draco decide not to be evil, they break away from the rest, and they actually become benevolent beings. Now this is something that Pete just told me recently, right after I had found scriptural support for this very thing in the Vedas, that there were in fact certain groups of reptilians, just like there could be all different types of humans in our galaxy. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. We can't automatically be interstellar racists and assume that everybody with a reptilian genetic type of look as a humanoid is automatically evil. Some of them apparently are not, and that is also described in the Vedas. Take a look at this. And Astika said, "Thou best of snakes, it behooveth thee not to grieve any longer." So let me explain what's going on here. Now we have one of these snakes, which is obviously, again, a humanoid, that does not wish to die in that great fire and essentially goes positive, repents, says, look, I'll do anything. I just want to turn this whole thing around. I don't want to be evil anymore. I want to help you guys. And he gets rescued. And this is the passage where that happens. Don't grieve any longer. I shall dispel this fear of yours from the blazing fire, meaning I'm not going to burn you. This terrible punishment, capable of burning like the fire at the end of the Yuga, I shall extinguish. And I'm setting you up there for what we're going to talk about in the next episode, which is that there are at least 150 references to this fire at the end of the Yuga that burns, which obviously is a solar energy flash. In this society, pre-flood, pre-Atlantean, something happens where everybody talks about this solar flash. It's like not a big deal at all. They describe it over and over and over again. But that is just one of so many times that they toss it in there end of the age. The sun's big fire that it does at the end of the Yuga. Yeah, we all know that. Everybody took it for granted. So these ETs clearly were in a civilization that saw that the sun does this regularly in even cycles of time, which appear to be the 25,920 year cycle, the wobble of the Earth's axis called precession to equinoxes. But let's get through the rest of this. Nurse not thy fear any longer. I'm not going to give you this terrible punishment similar to the fire at the end of the Yuga. And in the aftermath of him being rescued, they have a whole cast of these reptilian beings that are considered to be positive because of this guy being rescued, and they are called Nagas. And literally, the word Naga means snake in Sanskrit. So we have the Temple of the Nagas, the Temple of the Snakes, in homage to these benevolent, reptilian-looking humans that actually went positive and became very cooperative with everyone else who was on Earth at the time. Now, this is stunning because take a look at some of these surviving carvings. Now, this is unlikely to be the way they really looked, but I just want to show you some of these images where you're clearly seeing now in this example. First of all, you have the caduceus, which indicates DNA, of course, on the right. Then you have this woman who clearly has a human face, a human chest, a human everything up until you get down to the torso area. And then you have, oh, look at that. Her body is a snake. She does not have legs. She has a snake's tail coming off of her body. That is unambiguously a description of a reptilian humanoid female. And again, these carvings undoubtedly did not occur based on eyewitness testimony. They are carved well after that happened, based on legends that people were reading in books and extemporizing what would a snake like, and it dovetails very nicely with everything we're hearing about the Draco. Now let's see another example. In this next photograph, we see a couple, two people, where again they look totally normal human up until you look below the waist, and now they have serpent bodies. So this is proof right out there, again, that there was this Draco type of influence. Here it is from the side, where they are shown as having reptilian type of bodies but human faces. And then we have another example. This one, again, the person is female and from the waist up it looks normal, but then you have this snake-like body. And in today's world, the Indian culture still sells Naga type of sculptures like this, where you're seeing people with these snake-like bodies. It's crazy. Now I want to show you one more thing to close out this episode that gets into more detail about these snakes, these reptilians, just to really bring it home. There's a lot of examples, and once you're armed with this knowledge, you can go in and do a lot more work. I'm really just building the abacus, and then you can go in and do a lot more if you are inspired to pick this up where I left off. I'm only giving you an overview. But let's now look from Book 7, which is called the Dronaparva Gatochkaka Badha Parva. I probably ruined that pronunciation, but I did my best. This is where the Rakshasas get attacked. And look at this. It clearly describes some kind of craft. Then the high-souled son of Drona, with other weapons equipped with golden wings, clearly some kind of flying craft that was golden color, and inspired with mantras, speedily killed many Rakshasas. Afflicted by those shafts, this is the weapon, the particle beams, that vast force of broad-chested Rakshasas looked like a herd of infuriated elephants afflicted by lions. Afflicted by lions. Now look, again, humans have broad chests, snakes don't. This is big reptilian beings. They're often described as being of great size. And you're hearing again Rakshasas being attacked by somebody in a flying craft with golden wings. Now let's keep reading. Then those mighty Rakshasas, thus afflicted by Drona's son, became filled with rage and rushed against him. The prowess that Drona showed was exceedingly wonderful, for the feat he achieved is incapable of being achieved by any other being among living creatures. Since alone and unsupported, that warrior, acquainted with high and mighty weapons, burnt that Rakshasa force with his blazing shafts in the very sight of the prince of Rakshasas. So once again, we're seeing a description of a war taking place with awesome weaponry, in which a vast fleet of Draco are totally wiped out. And then we get another reference to the Samvardhaka fire. Whilst consuming that Rakshasa force, Drona's son in that battle shone resplendent like the Samvardhaka fire, while burning all creatures at the end of the Yuga. So there it is. He's described as having this burning look, and everybody talks about Samvardhaka fire as if they all know what it is. And it's just a given that it burns all creatures on Earth at the end of the Yuga. Now look, I don't want to get into this fear porn stuff. I'm not saying that we're all going to be killed by some kind of solar flash, but there does appear to be a type of cosmic Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark may very well have been a craft, and there may very well be extraterrestrials that are here as part of a interstellar rescue plan, so that when the sun is going to do this, everybody is essentially brought to safety, except for people whose karma invites going through something that negative. There's a little bit. Indeed, amongst those thousands of kings and those Pandavas, O Bharata, there was none except that mighty prince of the Rakshasa, vis-a-vis the heroic Ghatotkaka, capable of even looking at the son of Drona in that battle because of this fire that was around him. And this son of Drona was thus employed in consuming their ranks with his shafts of light, representing snakes of virulent poison. So the idea here is, again, the Samvartaka fire at the end of the age is how he looked, and everybody talks about it like everybody knows what it is. So here you have it. We have Draco reptilian beings undeniably being described as snakes, takshikas, rakshasas, and of course, we have the Nagas, which are the good guys that broke away and are now eulogized in these temples as beings where they look like a human from the waist up, but they have that snake body. It is totally incredible. I'm David Wilcock. This is Wisdom Teachings, bringing you the information you need that will set you free. Thanks for watching.